Two suspects aged 37 and 40 have today appeared in the Paarl Magistrate's Court in the Boland in connection with the murder of a 4-year-old girl from Paarl-East. Tamia Botha's body was found on a local school field near her home on Monday after she went missing the previous day. Members of the community discovered her body following a search in a separate incident in Gqeberha in the Eastern Cape. A 15-year-old Zenizole Vena who was gang raped and then later died at the Motherwell Police station. Violence against children remains a major concern in South Africa. Let's take this discussion further then. We are now joined via Zoom by the CEO for Save the Children, South Africa, Steve Miller. A warm welcome to you, sir. Thanks very much for joining us here on SABC News.
Thanks for having me, and good day to your listeners and viewers.
All right. Let's start by talking about, some of the threats, that are facing our children and how we can possibly avert them without being, overly paranoid. And I wonder if that's now, the new normal, that we, in fact, have to live as paranoid parents. And I mean, also, balancing out the fact that children need to be children. They still want to play outside and do all of those things. You can't necessarily stop all of that.
No, certainly not. And I would like to start by if anybody in Tamia Botha's family is listening, sending my deepest condolences. I can only imagine what that family is going through right now as you and I are having this discussion. And certainly it strikes fear into the heart of all of us around South Africa, particularly parents and caregivers of young children, because it makes us worry even more about them. But I think there's a lot that we can do as parents, some very basic things that we can do as parents to help ensure that something like this doesn't happen within our families. And we can talk about that if you would like.
Yeah, and I'd like us to actually get into a discussion about that. And on the back of that conversation, please, if you will indulge me, Steve, in the second case, we're talking about the young lady Zenizole. And I read the story, and, what was particularly scary about that was that it is understood that she first reported to a hospital to get some sort of medical attention, the hospital then sending her to the police station. And I mean, that is beyond unfortunate that, they didn't realize at that point that this is a child that needs urgent medical care. I mean, what is the duty of, we talk about the duty of police services, law enforcement, yes, but on the other hand, government hospital institutions, for example, you cannot be turning away a child who is so desperate for help to a point where, she dies, going to the next place where she's seeking help.
No, I can only agree. That's absolutely shocking. And there are a lot of shortcomings within the system, whether it's the criminal justice system, whether it's the health system. But what I'd like to jump back to is your initial question about what we can do as parents, because I think as South Africans, this is a whole of society issue, this violence against children. Every single one of us are either involved, implicated, somehow affected by violence against children. And what we can do is just simply not tolerate violence. And that sounds in itself quite a simple thing to do, but we need to examine ourselves. I'm not speaking about these two particular cases, but all of us, and how we raise our children. And we should raise them first and foremost, not to understand violence as a means to getting what you want. And that includes no corporal punishment in the home. Corporal punishment was effectively banned by the Constitutional Court in 2019. We should not be using physical discipline against our children. We should also not be emotionally traumatizing our children or neglecting them. All of these, even though we might think it's not significant, these are lessons that children with their brains like sponges are absorbing, and they learn later in life that violence is a means to an end. So we have that responsibility as South Africans not to tolerate violence at all.
Yeah.
And I would say the second thing, and we can get onto the justice system, but the second thing that we can do is become expert listeners to our children. We need to encourage them. I was sitting with my own daughter, a 7-year-old girl, in the car just now, imparting the same message. These children need to be able to speak to us as parents. They need to understand what sex and what violence are about. I'm sorry, they do. They need to understand so that they can express themselves in that language.
Yeah.
And they need to feel comfortable enough to come to us as parents and say, this is what I'm worried about. This is what I see. Because finally, the last point is, most of this violence we see in society, most of the rapes that we hear about in society, the people know each other. The perpetrators are in our sphere. We know them. We see them on the streets. They're in our family. They are nearby. And the child must be able to speak to us as parents in order for us to do something about it.
Yeah, I still want to talk about this issue of the justice system and the health system having to work together in a more effective way. Let me bring in another example. You know, you have to get a J88 form. You've just been assaulted, whether it's a woman or a child. You've just been assaulted. You get to the hospital. Hospital says, you'd have to first go get the J88 before you can be treated, because then that has to be put on a police report that this is what had happened. One can imagine that if the hospital and the police station are very far apart from each other, that just simply does not work for a victim. And I wonder if organizations like yourselves are able to raise these kinds of issues, that a person can't be expected to first start with their injuries at the police station and then get the J88 form and then go to the hospital. It doesn't work.
Yeah, you strike on something so important, and I'm glad that you brought it up. And what we do at Save the Children, my organization, is we put a huge premium on what we call child participation. So everything we do as an organization is informed by children themselves, children who are living these experiences that you're describing right now, children who've seen violence in front of them. They understand it, they understand the limitations of the system. Because on one level in South Africa, something we do extraordinarily well, which we all know, is we create policies and laws, procedures that are world-class. Our constitution, most progressive constitution in the world. Mm-hmm. Our Children's Act is phenomenal. The frame is there for us to operate in. So when we look as adults at the system and we say, what's wrong with it? And we try to tweak policy, et cetera, really, where you understand what's wrong with the system is when you speak to children who are directly affected by it. And so what we're trying to do, and you're right, there is a role for advocacy, is to bring these children's voices into this space. So instead of people like me coming and speaking to you about what happens on the ground, we have young people, brave, courageous, strong young people who speak up for their own rights, and we provide them with that platform. And if you can help us at SABC, that would be fantastic as well.
All right, Steve, thanks very much for that and the enlightening conversation you've given us here. Steve Miller, the CEO of Save the Children South Africa.